Our next guest, our next presenter, who we will welcome very, very warmly from where we are, is Mr. Rob Dalton. He is the Acting Chief Executive Officer of Sport Australia, and he is joining us today live and virtually to discuss sustainability for community sport and the big picture priorities. Rob, we can see you here in Sydney. It's great to see you, and I will hand over to you now, your very capable hands, and look forward to hearing your presentation. Please make Rob welcome.
Well, thanks, Sam. I wish I could be up there. It's been a long journey down here in Melbourne, as everyone in the room will know, and for those that are out there in Melbourne, I want to congratulate everyone for sticking fat. I must say it has been an incredibly difficult time, and we are very excited today because some of our restrictions have been removed. So that is fantastic. I did want to start out, and it would be remiss of me not to congratulate Pete Miskimmin on a wonderful career in Sport New Zealand. I had the fortune of playing field hockey against Pete Miskimmin. He was a hell of a lot better player than what I was, but it's been terrific to catch up with Pete and to work with him over the last 9 or 10 months. So I wish Pete all the very best. I also wanted to really thank, this is a fantastic forum, and I want to thank the organisers and the Office for Sport for New South Wales for putting this on, and hopefully this is just one of many of these get-togethers that we can have as a sector to try and help us move sport and community sport into the right direction. Sam, you made a couple of comments at the beginning after Dr. Lee spoke, and that was about complacency and also, what we need to do to make sport thrive. And we've all really got the great opportunity to be able to contribute, all of us. It isn't just one party. And I think, it's going to be a real challenge for us to deal with all the things we have, not the least of COVID, which is COVID, but to be able to take where we are with sport and be able to adapt what is happening in society and in our country in Australia to be able to really make sport thrive. And I think that's a really key thing that you mentioned, Sam. I think, the challenge that Pete threw out there to everybody was just not to accept what's been done before. And unfortunately, the way that our system works in Australia, and many of us in the room and on the call have been involved with community sport, we've either been administrators or coaches or officials in some respect. We are reliant on a few. It is a really taxing role to be involved with a community club, and it requires a great amount of time and a great amount of patience and passion to be able to really make a difference. And what tends to happen is that in most sports, in most community clubs, we only see people around for a couple of years because of the burnout factor. So it is something that we really need to acknowledge, that we've relied so heavily on our fantastic volunteer community over such a long period of time. But what we do need to do is we need to challenge how we're doing things. We can't just keep picking things up that we've always done. That's the way we've done it, and that's the way we're going to do it in the future. What I wanted to cover today, and this is a topic that we could all sit and talk about and would love to have the opportunity to do it for hours and hours, but just talking about the sustainability for community sport and really what the big picture priorities are. There was a report probably 6 months ago. I think time is flying as we speak. But Patrick Walker from the Sports Foundation did a survey of community sports, and there was a significant number of sports that actually raised the concern about the solvency of their own sports and their sporting organisations. Now, to date, I haven't seen too many community sports actually going to the wall, and thank goodness we've been able to get back to playing again, and hopefully in Melbourne very, very soon. But that is incredibly alarming that would be the case, and we all need to recognise that the way we're structured, we just cannot continue to do that. I think the four big things that I really want to try and cover off on. One is participation, and that's no surprise to anybody. Participation is the lifeblood, is the key. Without participants in our sport, we are not going to be able to progress. And I think in talking to all of our sports, and we have approximately 100 national sporting organisations that we talk to as part of the Sport Australia and the Australian Sports Commission. Most of the sports and national sporting organisations with a disability thought that their participation numbers post-COVID would reduce from anywhere between 30 to 50%, which is alarming, as you can all imagine. So participation numbers, if we have people participating, both young kids and adults, then the more participants we have, the more that the sector benefits, because as everyone knows, we have a three-tiered system. We have our community clubs, we have our state sporting organisations, and we have our national sporting organisations, and each has an incredibly important role in being able to make sure that we maximise our participation. We're always getting new people coming through. And one of the alarming statistics is that over many years, and certainly in the last decade, that we've experienced churn in our sector of around 30%. So that's 30% per annum across the whole sector. We are reducing our numbers of participants. Now, that's not a net number, because clearly we bring in a significant amount of new participants every year, but we're losing 30% of our participants. And the impact on that, just, future participants, future administrators, future volunteers, our masters programs across all sports, it's alarming. And those people are disappearing, not for one particular reason, but for a whole host of them. Cost sits up there pretty at a very high level. People traveling, obviously not going to be doing that in the near future. Just the time taken. I think what we're finding, and Peter covered off on some of these things, is that the society's changed, and when we're not prepared to put in the same amount of time for the same output as what we have been. And going back to the challenge before, let's not just do the same things that we've done. I grew up playing sport, as I mentioned, and training was 2 times a week, and you played on the weekend, and it took you to an hour to get to the ground, and you played. It was pretty much your whole Saturday, and if you're in a rep team, you played on Sunday. That's a fairly significant piece out of your life. Fast forward 50 years, we're still doing the same thing by and large. We're still having 2 trainings a week, and even though we've got so much more pressure on us from our time. So if I can, the number one issue is around participation, and we've got to find ways, all of us, to be able to get more participants playing the game. Now, what is really clearly linked is my second point, and that is the experience. I find that the reason we've got such churn is because we're still doing and providing the same experience that we have for 50 years, over 50 years. The model is really based upon volunteers, and we've got such a far greater demand on having a good experience for our young children who come along. I had a very good friend of mine that contacted me a little while ago and said that he was so excited because his 2 daughters were keen to go down and have a game of hockey at his old club, and where I played as well. He rang me the following day and said how disappointed he was because his daughters had both said after one training session they didn't want to go back because it was boring. And I think we have to make sure that the experience, we challenge the experience. We don't just have the same thing that we've been providing. We may need to bring people in to actually provide a better experience so that the young kids walk away feeling as though they're having fun, because that's what it's about. Pete mentioned that before. It's not just about winning. And so to that extent, we are being challenged more and more around providing social means of sport, not just the competitive Saturday after Saturday after Saturday 2 training sessions a week. We are being challenged to provide better social options to be able to just play when you want to play, be able to play with your friends, be able to have mixed teams, playing at the same venue, because people like to be able to allocate a certain amount of time for their sport. So it's really important that we do that. I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of our sports, and one sport in particular that really stands out to me as being the sport of the 2020s, without putting too much reference, is touch football. And it's a great sport because you get your 30 to 45 minutes or an hour of activity, which is terrific. You can get to play with your own friends. You can get to pick the spot where you play. You can play there every week. And you can have a beer and a sausage sizzle afterwards and then go home without having spent the whole weekend doing it. And touch footy started out as touch footy, and it just so happens that society is really demanding those sorts of options. I know in corporate Australia, there are lots of corporate Australia teams that go into it because it's something that everybody can play. So we as a sector really need to challenge that model. Have we got social forms of the game? And that links in with the third option around infrastructure. Not only do we have the social forms of the game, the ability for people to play when they want to play, not when we want them to play, but also have we got the infrastructure in place to be able to enable those people? For those that have wandered around Europe over the last couple of years, or for some time actually, you see the soccer fields, inner city soccer fields that are small, 6-on-6 games or 5-on-5. Concrete pitches, fencing around, you swipe your card and you can book the court, but people can go and play when they want to play, right? Not necessarily in a competition whereby they've got to pay $600 in fees for the whole season, not knowing whether they want to have a couple of weeks off in the middle of the season. So we've got to be more accommodating, and we've got to have infrastructure in place. One of the challenges that I see is that, in fact, there was a report just recently done by in New South Wales around capacity of sporting infrastructure, and by 2036, the report says that there'll need to be 40% more infrastructure on a single-use basis for us to be able to cope with the growth that is going to be needed. Now that's whether it's being replaced facilities or whether they're new facilities. Now that is significant. And if you think about, well, where are we going to find those facilities? Not just the facilities, but the land. And we've really got to challenge ourselves, because people don't want to drive for an hour. It's annoying to drive for an hour to play sport and an hour home, and you've lost the day. So we need to be more creative in how we actually deal with infrastructure. People like to be playing within a certain region. Do we do some work which is probably necessary for us to do, looking at new developments where there might be some industrial complexes being made, and do we look at putting facilities on top of factory spaces? All of those sort of things, so we can maintain, instead of having to drive 2 hours, because facilities are getting further and further out because of the value of land, but we're in a city, we're able to keep people playing the game, and that's really critical. I think the final thing which we could talk about for forever, and that's the model that we operate in Australia. And I think during COVID, what has stood out to me, and being relatively new in this role, is just the changes that have happened over COVID. We've seen the state sporting organisations have significantly more power in relation to how the structure of the sport's going to be going. And I think as a sector, we need to make sure that everyone has a lane to swim in. And at the moment, we have our community clubs, which have our members and are so critical to making sure that we put on the show. And we have our state sporting organisations, and the community clubs vote for those people in those roles in a normal federated response. And we often talk about our federated model of structure. But we don't have a federated model. We have a hybrid federated model, because then we have our national sporting organisation, and the role of these organisations vary across our 100 sports. There's no question about that. And this is something we need to get very, very clear. What does the national sporting organisation model look like? What does the state sporting organisation model look like? And what does the community club organisation look like? And we need to get that right so that everybody is clear on what their role is. Who looks after participation? I personally would like to see an overarching Australia-wide participation strategy for each sport. And then the states, who are the ones that have, the biggest investment in that, they go out and execute. But the national body, so we get some consistency, we get some efficiency in the way that we do things. So it's really, really critical that our model gets looked at. And we've certainly seen over the COVID period we've seen a lot of pushback because there are limited funds. If you think about our the pool of revenue that comes from playing members, that comes to the community clubs, that then goes up into the state sporting organisations and national sporting organisations. We've had 3 months in most states where we haven't had any revenue. So, of course, that puts enormous pressure on all of those sporting bodies. And yes, we've been able to tap into JobKeeper with the federal government, which has been fantastic. And as Dr. Lee mentioned before, the state governments, which have been outstanding. But there is only a limited amount of resource that does go around to help us be able to continue to progress the objectives that we need to within the sports sector. So I think I'm pretty much out of time, Sam, unless I've got still a couple of minutes. But I did just want to say that we have to, as a sector, we do have to look at what we're doing. We need to get more people participating. The fundamental issue is that we have seen reductions in participation numbers. We are seeing 30% churn year on year. We are seeing an increase in population, but our numbers are not maintaining with that population. And as Pete mentioned before, we're certainly seeing an increase in migration, and a large proportion of those people are not coming in and playing sport because it's just not the way that they've actually grown up in their society. And so if this trend continues on, our participation is going to lessen. And I think we need to take account that what we've seen, certainly over the last 5 years, we've seen an increase of 5,000 female teams into AFLW. We've seen the rise of NRLW. We're seeing a lot more of our sports people being paid money. And the risk that we have is that our traditional sports, all the sports that we love, are going to be under significant pressure because of that money. And so we need to make sure that we're certainly working hard to work through those big priorities. So, Sam, I think I'll leave it there. I want to again just thank the federal government for their ongoing support in JobKeeper, which has been fantastic for us, and the state governments, which have just done an incredible job with funding packages for all sports. So, Sam, back to you.